Hello, fellow Rebel Capitals. Hope you're well. So we've got a story that's absolutely shocking. And I wish I was using hyperbole, but as you will soon find out, I'm not. This is the government of Australia actually setting up a ministry or task force, whatever it's called down there, to literally change men's behavior. Not making that up. And it's not just in Australia. I think right now, Australia, or since 2020, has really been a testing ground for the global elite and the World Economic Forum. I don't think that's really going out on a limb. I think most of you would agree. So if this is being, let's say, tested in the petri dish of authoritarianism that is Australia, I think you should expect it to be rolled out in Canada for sure and proposed in the United States. Now, will they go along with this nonsense in the US like they go along with it in Australia and like they'll likely go along with it in Canada? Who knows? That's remains to be seen. But prepare for these types of proposals in the US moving forward. Let's go right over to my Twitter feed. And here it is. The title of this article that I posted from the Washington Post: Australia's new men's behavior change secretary says the job won't be easy because you know how men are. I mean, they're just the dregs of our society. And we would just live in this utopian universe if it wasn't for those men. I mean, come on. This is absolutely insane. And wait till you see their justification or lack thereof. That's how you actually know that this is totally bogus. And this is just a play for more control and for more censorship. It's blatantly obvious. But look at this. The state of Victoria appointed a parliamentary secretary for men's behavior change. And this guy's name is Tim Richardson. Tim, if you're watching this video, grab your balls, dude. Seriously, do you realize how big of a beta blue pill cuck you are? By actually taking a role to criticize men as a whole, in general, and say that it's up to you to use social engineering to retrain all of their defects that they just have from birth. Because we know men as a group are just toxic. And what we really need to do is control them. And ideally, we'd have just all the women and the cucks and the trans and everyone else, all these favored groups. We just have them control all of these terrible men. And it's not just men. It's really white Christian straight males, to be more specific. I mean, this is just jaw-dropping. But at the end of the day, is it? I mean, would you expect anything else from the trial ground for the World Economic Forum and the global elite? Basically, the trial ground for the Malthusian cult. Because think about it. The Malthusian cult, what do they want? They want fewer people. They want to decrease the birth rate. So I've got a great way of doing that. Just eliminate all the testosterone and masculinity from men. And guess what's going to happen to the birth rate? Just try to use social engineering to make boys just effectively a bad version of little girls. And magically, in 10, 15 years, you'll see the birth rates plummet, like we've seen across the board in the West. So they're disguising this ruse as a way to curb domestic violence. Because what's happened, actually, let's go to this article, then we'll go back to the Twitter feed. And I want to go over to Zero Hedge because they have a fantastic summary of what's really happening behind the scenes here and what we should be watching out for. So Australia's answer to a crisis of sexist violence, an official for men's behavior change. The appointment was prompted by a spat of killings. This is not about all men, but all. Look, listen to how stupid this nonsense is, this drivel. They're contradicting themselves even within one sentence. They can't even say a sentence without contradicting themselves. And what's one thing that we have learned definitively since 2020? Whenever the central planners, politicians, authoritarians are saying something that contradicts other things that they've said or something that doesn't make sense, you know that it's propaganda. It's not about all men, but all men absolutely have a role. Well, then how is it not about all men? You're saying all men have a role, but it's not about all men. What? How does that even make sense? You see, this is just, it's like they're sitting back in their evil cave or wherever they meet, and they're drinking goat's blood or whatever it is they do on their free time. And they sit there and they're almost laughing at themselves. You know what? I'm going to go out on TV, Joe, and next week I'm going to say something that doesn't even make sense. And people are just going to buy it. And the less sense I make, then the funnier it is the next week when they all meet in the evil cave and drink goat's blood together. Did you see how ridiculous that was? That I said, do you see how ridiculous what I said was last week in the New York Times or whatever? And they bought it. They actually printed it. Oh man, these people are really sheep. They sure are suckers. I can't wait till we can just herd them all together and just eradicate 4 billion of them, these mouth breathers. That all they're good for is just sucking up the resources for the people that really deserve them. I mean, this is the attitude here. They look at the average citizen in pure detest. They can't stand the sight of them. Just the normies, the average Joe and Jane. They just make them sick to their stomach that they even have to live on the same planet. I mean, and if you think I'm exaggerating, no. Do your own research, man. Just read the stuff. Listen to their videos. Go on the World Economic Forum's website. Read about their God and Savior, Thomas Malthus. I'm not making this stuff up. And you say, George, well, maybe they're just good intentioned. I mean, okay, so we've had violence. That's obviously a domestic violence. It's a problem in Australia, so why shouldn't they address it? Aha, that's where the facts actually come into play. Because look at how they're framing this. I've highlighted the first paragraph or sentence. As Australia grapples with a wave of violence against women that the Prime Minister has called a national crisis, one state now has designated official in charge of one of the biggest potential solutions, changing men's behavior. So first, let's address the potential solution, right? So what they have is, now, is this a problem? Well, of course, any murder, any violence is a problem. But to think that you've got a guy that's, let's say, addicted to drug, obviously has mental issues, and commits murder, to think that he would not have committed murder if he just would have been in a good old-fashioned 12-step program. If we just could have got him and talked some sense into him and let him know that you don't need to take your aggression out by shooting your wife with a 12 gauge. All you have to do is go out and play a little golf, or maybe you can go to the bingo parlor on Friday nights, or maybe you join your local bowling league. Sure. Or maybe why don't you go out and do a gay march? And that'll solve the problem. Then you can get out your aggression there, and then you won't go around killing people. I mean, who are we trying to kid? This is absurd to think that you could take someone that has a predisposition, is mentally ill to the point of killing another human being, and that all they needed was a little old-fashioned TLC from a blue pill beta male cuck, and that would have solved the problem. Then instead of going around killing people with their 12 gauge, they would have just gone around the whole entire neighborhood and given everyone a big, gigantic hug. I mean, this is... Honestly, it's hard for me to even do a video on this because it's so completely absurd. But let's get back into the facts, because you have this national crisis where they have to put someone in charge of, oh, by the way, not just social engineering, not just re-education, but what do you think they're going to do? They're going to start censoring people online, and they're going to start censoring men. And I can assure you, the next time that they lock everyone in a cage for climate change or whatever their reason is for the next lockdowns in Australia, that any man that goes online and says, yeah, these lockdowns are bullshit. Oh, we got to turn his computer off really quick. Well, why are you turning his computer? Isn't that against his rights? Aren't you violating his privacy? Oh, no. Are you kidding me? Because we know that lockdowns protect women and children. And by him opposing the lockdowns, well, that's really what he's doing, is he's committing violence against women. And we've got a task force for that. Shame, shame, shame. In fact, we won't even turn off his computer. We should just take him straight to jail. How about if you oppose bigger government? Oh, well, you know that the government is all for women. So if you oppose bigger government, then you oppose women. Then we'd have the right to turn you off, turn off your computer, censor you from social media, and why not just throw you in jail too? Because you're part of the problem. You see, this is where this is headed, and this is the genesis of the idea. They're just masking. They're just spinning it with, oh my gosh, and they're creating this frenzy because of some domestic violence, which, is it real? Absolutely. But is it a problem that can be solved with a bureaucrat? I mean, let's get real. And by the way, let's go into the actual data. You'll notice, and I'll go through this article a little bit more, but you have no data in this article at all. Isn't that weird? You would think that all of these central planners in their brilliance and genius and all their task forces would actually have some data and some charts that we could look at. But there's a reason they don't show you a chart. I'll show you why. Let's go over or back over to my Twitter feed. And here is the chart. Because remember, this is all about these women being killed, and this is a national crisis. Well, look at what has happened to the intimate partner homicide rate going all the way back to 1990 in Australia to 2023. And this is the rate per 100,000 population age 18 years and over. What is this? I see a massive decline. Wow. The green line represents homicide against women. And oh, by the way, the gray line represents homicide against men. But we don't need to care. We don't need to address that at all. No. No, you know, if some men get shot here and there, well, you know, it is what it is. But if some women get shot, well, now again, we can use that and we can spin it to get people caught up in this emotional frenzy to where they give us more power, control, and they allow us to censor the public. And again, we're going to go over to this Zero Hedge article because they summarize this brilliantly. So let's look at this again. So the violence, most likely, or the homicide, the amount of females that killed males. So the males are the guys getting shot in the head with the 12 gauge back in 1994 was actually higher than the amount of males that are killing females today. So again, I'm not saying this isn't a problem, but it sure as hell isn't a problem that's going to be fixed by government. I can assure you of that. And if anything, government is going to make it worse. Look at this uptick when it flattened out and started trending higher. And again, it's still trending lower. I mean, let's be honest, but this little uptick right here that they're referring to. And of course, they refer to this in the article, but they refer to this uptick. They say it's up 28%, but they don't show you this chart showing how massively it has decreased over the last 30 years. And oh, by the way, it's decreased over 30 years tremendously without government involvement, without Tim Richardson, the quintessential beta male blue pill cuck. Without Tim and without Jacinda and without the central planners, it somehow came down on its own. Imagine that. So how about we just get out of the way and let it continue to trend down? But oh, no, 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 no. They can use this uptick to completely, it's really misinformation on their end. It's ironic, isn't it? That the people that need to save you from misinformation and disinformation are the ones that create the most misinformation and disinformation. Because there's no way in hell they're going to show you this chart. And before we get back to the other, the CNBC article and the Zero Hedge article, I want to point out here that these are the same people that claim that men and women are identical physically and psychologically. So if men and women are identical physically and psychologically, and if more men are involved in violent acts, well, then it obviously has to do with something other than the fact they are men. Because if it's true that they're creating these acts because of their sex or because of their gender, then that would imply that there's differences between the genders. So which is it? Which is it? Jacinda, Tim, which is it? You see, they can't answer that question. Why? Because it contradicts every other one of their worldviews that they espouse on you, which shows you that this is propaganda bullshit 101. Let's get back to the CNBC article. Here you go. Statistics suggest gender-based violence in Australia is getting worse. Really? Really? How can you say that with a straight face? The only way you can is if you know you are lying. You know you're lying because you didn't look at the data. And if you did, you purposely excluded it just so you could say that. According to a report from Australian Institute of Criminology released in April, intimate partner homicide committed against women increased 28%. That was that little uptick I showed you. And oh, by the way, what happens when you lock men in a cage for 2 years? Answer: you might have some unintended consequences. What happens when you take away men's purpose in life? What happens when you create a world of hopelessness for males? Usually it doesn't end well. What happens when you take away their sense of self-worth? When you're constantly criticizing them from a very young age at how bad they are and how toxic their gender is. And then they grow up with no positive male role models, no powerful, strong male role models with integrity and character. What happens then? When they're raised by single mothers and they go to school and all the teachers are female. And then they think it's good. Well, I just have to be like a girl. And then you get all this testosterone building up and they're rudderless. And then you lock them in a cage for 2 years. And the only thing that gave them purpose was their job and their ability to provide. You take it away from them and basically make them dependent upon the state. What do you think is going to happen? So like everything else, this is the government playing the role of the arsonist and the firefighter. But isn't that mysterious how it just started to go up in 2021? I mean, who could have predicted that? And so one of these just psychopaths, last name is Fitz-Gibbon, which is a dead giveaway that she's a feminist right there in the first place. Whenever a gal has two last names, you know, and this is just a general rule. Obviously, there's exceptions, but whenever a gal has two last names, you know, two things are true. Number one, feminist. Number two, the probability that she gets a divorce is like 99%. Throughout my experience, I got a lot of anecdotal evidence with a lot of my friends, and that's the way the cookie crumbles. Let's get back to the article here. So Fitz-Gibbon countered that violence against women cannot be addressed without engaging those who are most often responsible for it. So again, let's think about this through the lens of contradiction and therefore propaganda. So if I said to Fitz-Gibbon, I said, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. We need to engage and address and acknowledge those who are most often responsible for committing the crime. So, Miss Fitz-Gibbon, would you also suggest that we do that in the United States? But not just with genders. How about with races, with ethnicities? Do you suggest we do that, Miss Fitz-Gibbon? You see where I'm going with that? Of course, she would back off of the, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. We cannot look at this in terms of race and ethnicity. If 80% of the population is committing, or if 10% of the population is committing 80% of the crime, we cannot dive into the details there. This is just men against women, and men commit all the crime. We don't want to take it a step further. See, and now, do I think that we should break things down by race and ethnicity? No, I'm not saying that. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. I'll leave that up to you to decide. What I'm doing is I'm pointing out the hypocrisy here, the absolute hypocrisy, which proves further that this is pure, unadulterated propaganda to increase their power, control over your life. And more specifically, to make sure that there's no uprisings in the future when they exercise their power and control and implement their Malthusian Marxist agenda. Let's go right over to Zero Hedge. And I'm just going to read it right here, because this is fantastic. Well done, Zero Hedge. The development of totalitarian governments always coincides with sweeping efforts to socially engineer the population to adhere to less rebellious behaviors. Specifically, groups that present a threat to the regime are usually identified and targeted with propaganda or indoctrination. In tandem, the rest of the population is also conditioned to fear those groups and treat them with suspicion. In this way, the establishment elites mold the more submissive public into a shield that protects them from the revolutionaries that might dethrone them. But what happens when the social engineers want to create tyranny on a global scale? The list of possible rebels grows exponentially larger, and efforts to control them all or demonize them all become far more complex. How can the elites simplify their agenda and suppress the public with more efficiency? The only answer is to attack and cripple the largest subset of the population that is most likely to give them problems in the future. Which monolithic group has more likely or is more likely to fight back against the system? Answer: masculine men. That's what this is all about. All right, crazy stuff, guys. On that note, Try to enjoy the rest of your afternoon and make sure, especially in today's day and age, that you are standing up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism, and pushing back against this obvious propaganda. We'll see you in the next video.